Good morning and welcome back on the program.
Good morning. Great to be with you.
Yes, a lot to discuss here. We'll jump right into it. And I know busy yesterday putting out a statement. We've been talking about it here, and a federal judge halting parts of New York's new strict gun laws, and they were to go in effect, and they went in effect the first. Now there's a stay, and we'll see what this means. There's a lot of issues and a lot of areas of concern and discussion. Good moral character, sensitive locations. What does this all mean? But Rocco, if you don't mind, I think you have, and maybe we can get you to react to this, Elise. But our governor here issuing her statement, and I think just there's a bit of contradictory.
Yeah, Elise,
in regards to
just Governor Hochul's wording of her reaction to this decision that came out, or this order. She states, while this decision leaves aspects of the law in place, it is deeply disappointing that the judge wants to limit my ability to keep New Yorkers safe and to prevent more senseless violence. Interesting words from the governor. The judge wants to limit my ability to keep New Yorkers safe. What's your thought on that?
My thought on that is Kathy Hochul is attempting to shred the Constitution. And let's remember that this law was put into place in response to the U.S. Supreme Court correctly ruling that the concealed carry limitations in New York State were, in fact, unconstitutional. That was the correct ruling by the Supreme Court. What did Albany Democrats do with single-party rule? They rammed through and doubled down on another unconstitutional law, and it has hugely challenging aspects of it. For example, it designates law-abiding gun owners within the Adirondack Park as felons. It's caused the cancellation of historic reenactments across my district because of how far-reaching this law is. So the judge correctly ruled, and shame on Kathy Hochul for questioning this judge, but also for doubling down on this unconstitutional gun ban. And this is an issue. It's on the ballot. It's not only on the ballot statewide for the governor's races and to win back state Senate seats, but it's on the ballot at the federal level. I'm proud to have an A+ when it comes to my positions and my record on the Second Amendment. My opponent, who is a downstate Democrat from Poughkeepsie, has an F, and he deserves an F. He said when Kathy Hochul forced this through in Albany, he said, this sounds like a good deal. It's not a good deal. It's a bad deal for all New Yorkers, and I'm going to support the court challenges if we have to take it all the way to the Supreme Court.
Elise, one of the aspects of the law that the judge left somewhat intact is the good moral character, changing the burden of proof, but still making that a factor. Yet that's pretty subjective in terms of what's good moral character. Some people may find something immoral that others don't. Should that aspect of the law go as well, do you think?
Well, my concern is that, again, it also requires submitting up to 3 years' worth of social media account information. And we have seen that oftentimes that information it should not be used as part of this process. And it's just too far-reaching. The other aspect that's problematic among many of this law is there was no input from the county sheriff's and county clerk's office. And now you have people who are required to go through 3 years of social media account information, and you're going to have very different judges of what is appropriate and what is not according to this law. So I think the whole law should be repealed. And the reality is we are facing a crime crisis in New York State. There is a reason why first-time gun purchasers have skyrocketed across New York State. It's because they want to take their Second Amendment in their own hands for self-protection. They have the constitutional right to do that, and Kathy Hochul is trying to ban guns and make it more difficult to access a firearm during a crime and violence crisis in the state of New York.
One of the areas that the judge in the recent ruling kept in was churches, that would be a sensitive place where people couldn't carry guns. Yet there are a number of churches who are pushing back against that, and they said, no, we don't want that to be the rule. We want our parishioners who are God-fearing people to be able to bring their gun in churches because there's a lot of issues that have happened in a church. Should that be deemed a non-sensitive place so people can bring their guns into church, in your opinion?
I agree with the churches. Again, I have a district where we are law-abiding gun owners in upstate New York in the North Country, and we have some of the safest communities in New York State. And I believe that a good guy with a gun is so important to have when there are violent criminals. So as I said, I support the full repeal of this, and I stand with the churches.
Also, one item that was not struck down, or at least blocked by the judge at this point, was something that nobody's really been talking about too much, but the line speaks for itself in the judge's ruling that says it will still allow any restriction on firearm possession in any gathering of individuals to collectively express their constitutional rights to protest or assemble. So essentially saying that if you're gathering for an event to support or advocate for Second Amendment rights, to peaceably assemble under the Constitution, you still, under this judge's order, will be prohibited from having a firearm in that setting, correct?
Well, I have concerns with that. And for example, when law-abiding gun owners spoke out against the SAFE Act, that was when I was first running for Congress in 2014. Those were very peaceful protests, but those were law-abiding gun owners, many who had concealed carry permits, and they have a constitutional right to do that. This law is going after law-abiding gun owners rather than addressing the real driver of crime and violence in this state, which is failed bail reform, which is defunding the police. So it's Democrats doubling down to go after the law-abiding citizens rather than the criminals. So again, this law should be repealed in full. We will challenge every aspect of this law all the way to the Supreme Court. And
another issue as well that's been in the headlines and has a variety of perspectives going on is immigration and crossing the border, and the millions, several million illegal immigrants that have crossed the border under the Biden administration so far, and kind of reversing what President Trump had been doing. And then there was the news of individuals being transported up to Martha's Vineyard or New York City. But when you can certainly comment on any of those issues, but as you running for re-election in upstate New York here in the district, to what degree do you encounter when you're campaigning or you're talking to constituents, do they actually feel the impact of illegal immigration so far away? Because I think that's something where the headlines do suggest there's problems going on. But just in your campaigning, do you encounter that as a real issue that people experience up here in upstate New York?
Absolutely. I hear about it every day from constituents and voters, and I will tell you why specifically our district is impacted. I represent the northern border, and I represent Border Patrol officers who have been transferred over and over and over again to the southern border to deal with this crisis that's been created by Joe Biden's failed border policies. And I hear from their families, I hear from their spouses, not only the multiple no-notice deployments, so that creates significant uncertainty for those families, but also it means that the northern border doesn't have the personnel that we need. Obviously, the northern border issues are very different from the southern border issues, but we still need personnel up here in order to continue to encourage the economic commerce, but also to keep safety and security on a very large northern border, especially with the St. Lawrence River. The other aspect that has an immediate impact is I've gotten briefings with my county sheriffs locally, and they've seen a significant uptick when it comes to fentanyl overdoses. The vast majority of that fentanyl is pouring in across our southern border, and it is killing people across this country and across New York State. So it absolutely impacts our district. People look to who is the Border Patrol endorsing. I'm proud to have the Border Patrol endorsement, and people are very concerned about the southern border, and they know that every state is impacted, every community. Plus, let's also mention the flights of illegals to New York State that have been caught in the dark of night. That's going to be an important priority for congressional oversight to get as much information as possible about what I believe are illegal, it's essentially human trafficking by the Biden administration. So I get asked about it by voters all the time, but certainly that northern border piece is directly related.
Right.
Elise, with respect to farmers, New York State seems to be making it more and more difficult for farmers to operate. Now they want them to be required to pay overtime for anything over 40 hours. They've restricted the number of days in a row they can work. Probably these laws are passed by people who are not farmers and don't know much about the farming industry. But my question to you is, should there be a federal law that exempts farm workers from state law requirements with respect to minimum wage and overtime and number of hours worked? I know sometimes there's an effort to leave things to the states, but sometimes when you do, the states don't do the right thing. And for the farmers, then it affects the whole country and affects inflation. If sometimes the states are just becoming too restrictive, and you need the federal government to step in and do something which maybe is more reasonable for the farming industry. So my question is, do you favor a federal law that would exempt farm workers from state law labor requirements on those three areas: overtime, number of days in a row you can work. Those two.
Well, first of all, I already have legislation that I co-sponsored called the Protect Local Farms Act. That would prevent the New York State Farm Laborers Wage Board decision recommendation to lower the overtime threshold from 60 hours to 40 hours from taking effect. So there is federal legislation that's been introduced. Obviously, under Nancy Pelosi, they're not going to bring it up because they do not support rural America. They do not support the farms. But my concern from the very beginning of this process is downstate Democrats, like my opponent from Poughkeepsie, which is downstate, did not listen to farmers, and they did not speak out against Kathy Hochul. And this proposal was put forth by, Democrat leaders who do not represent agriculture, who do not represent farms like I do in my district. Kathy Hochul did not listen to farm owners. She did not listen to the New York State Farm Bureau. I did multiple events, and I continue to do lots of events with farmers to talk about this issue, and importantly, laborers. Many of the ag laborers participated in these events to say that this is going to make them look elsewhere because it makes New York State agriculture less competitive, that they are more likely to go to Vermont, to go to Pennsylvania. Who does that hurt? That hurts New Yorkers, that hurts our farmers. And without farms, we have no food. Our farmers feed our communities, they feed the state, they feed the world. And it's a national security, economic security issue if we do not have robust farming and robust agriculture in upstate New York. This is an area where I'm proud to have hundreds and hundreds of farm endorsements across my district, both last cycle and this cycle, as we're running for office, because the agricultural issue is on the ballot, and we're going into a new farm bill in the next Congress, and I was a leading negotiator in the last farm bill, which helped improve many aspects of our federal agricultural policy, specifically for dairy farms, for apple orchards, for specialty crops, which are so important in upstate New York and the North Country.
Yeah, and at least maybe before we run out of time as well, one of the last topics, like many small businesses and families, farms, they feel the crunch, financial hardships, and the fact that they're just trying to stay afloat, and add that into inflation and the cost of everything increasing here. What do we do? How do we fight this? You see the move by New York also to move to alternative energy sources, and maybe cripple or curtail some of the advancement in business wanting to come in here and build. But what do we do as far as fighting inflation? How is this impacting upstate New Yorkers?
This is the number one issue for every community, every constituent right now. People are struggling to make ends meet. Small businesses are struggling. Farms are struggling. And it's a tax, essentially, on every American. And people know that it's a direct result of single-party Democrat rule and Democrat spending. It's $9 trillion since last year of taxpayer dollars coming from the Biden administration, Nancy Pelosi, and Chuck Schumer. And people are paying the price. I see it every week when I go to the grocery store. I hear it every small business I visit. I hear it from every single family. What are Republicans going to do? Number one, stop the reckless spending. Stop the trillions of dollars of wasteful spending going out the door. A Republican House would immediately do that and bring our budget back to balance. We also need to unleash American energy independence. You know, on day one, Joe Biden took every executive action that the left forced him to, that he willingly did, to essentially declare war on American energy producers. And now we have a president of the United States who's begging OPEC, and the American people are paying the price. We are on pace to have the most expensive home heating bills this winter than the past 16 years. And this is on top of the already challenging inflation prices. So people are struggling, and that's one of the reasons why it's so important that Republicans earn back the House, to bring that check and balance to this radical agenda that we've seen that's really caused a crisis in just 2 short years.
And one issue that is not directly in your district, but I'm sure these types of news has ripple effect throughout our central New York, Mohawk Valley, and throughout the rest of the state. But Micron Technology announced that they were investing $100 billion in this semiconductor chip manufacturing plant in the Syracuse area. And so I think, and you talk about creating thousands of jobs, that a lot of our local officials and Senator Schumer as well and Governor Hochul, they highlighted that this announcement was made, and it seems on paper like it's a good idea. And part of I guess of what attracted Micron to New York over places like Texas was a lot of the incentives I think that New York offered, including $6 billion in state and local incentives, as well as Senator Schumer said he's going to push for Micron to get some portion of this $52 billion in the chip funding that was passed through Congress and recently signed. What's your reaction to just how that all played out? Is it good news to have a company come in upstate New York, but about creating the incentives and subsidies that essentially attract some of these companies to New York? Is there still a problem there somewhere?
I believe there is a problem. And look, any type of investment in upstate New York is a good thing. However, New York State has chosen and picked winners and losers, and the small businesses and manufacturers that are losing out are the ones, the vast majority, that do not get a state subsidy, because those businesses and manufacturers are paying the highest taxes, dealing with the most stringent regulations in the least friendliest business state in the nation, which is why you see an exodus of people and businesses. The other aspect and problem with the CHIPS Act, and I was an early supporter of an earlier version of the CHIPS Act, they lessened we wanted to make sure that dollars didn't go towards China or any manufacturing or facilities in China. They lowered that threshold. So there will be dollars that go towards communist China. I adamantly don't support that. So, again, New York State dangles these subsidies, but it's very unfair to the business community broadly. And New York State needs to have Lee Zeldin as governor and a Republican state Senate to lower taxes on small businesses, to lower taxes for manufacturers, rather than picking and choosing winners and losers.
Right.
Congresswoman Elise Stefanik joining us here on the program. And one more, Mark, before we let her go.
Thank you. Elise, what's your thought on the federal ban against marijuana, that making marijuana Schedule I drug, although there are several states that are pretty much disregarding that law? And then Biden's recent decision to pardon people who have been convicted of marijuana possession under federal law, about 6,500 people affected. And I understand we have to separate the person from the act. Did he do the right thing in that particular instance, and should the marijuana laws federally be changed?
I have concerns, and I have met with many individuals who have struggled with addiction, who are now in recovery, and marijuana was their gateway drug, and then ultimately to harder drugs. So I have very deep concerns about this broader legalization effort. And I have concerns that, aspects of this, when you talk about using this as a crutch in New York State, this is another example where they're trying to use a specific industry as a crutch rather than dealing with the overall anti-business climate. So I have concerns that law enforcement has shared with me, that the addiction and recovery communities that share with me in terms of this broad legalization of marijuana.
Elise, we thank you for the time here this morning, and I know your effort to continue here to serve folks in upstate New York in the newly drawn 21st Congressional District, and really it's about a mile east from us. The line is right down the road, so it is interesting as well, the new shift, the new breakup. But if folks want to find out more about you, if they are unaware and maybe they are interested in just learning more of your positions on some of these issues, is there a good way, the best way to find out more about you?
Yes, they can go to EliseForCongress.com or follow on social media at Elise Stefanik.
We thank you for your time here, Congresswoman, and hopefully we can do it again, all right?